Okay, I think this is a good time for us to get started. This is a great turnout. Thank you all for being here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jacob. I'm one of the VPs on the board of Quant Club, and I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Dave Popple, who's joining us today from New York. The Wall Street Journal calls him a hedge fund psychologist, but officially he is called an industrial organizational psychologist. Now, there are more astronauts in this country than people who do what Dr. Dave does, even though the finance world is massive. He willingly chooses to step into the minds of traders on Wall Street, which, knowing the members of Quant Club, is not necessarily something most people would want to do, but he does it nonetheless. And jokes aside, I'm as excited as you guys to hear what he has in store for us. So without further ado, let's give a big round of applause for Dr. Dave.
Well, thanks. I'm assuming everybody's wildly clapping, but the thing about Zoom is that it clears out those extraneous sounds. I'm sure that my dogs bark, you won't hear them either.
Yeah, you got a rousing round of applause.
All right.
But to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you made your way into the industry you work in?
Yeah, a little bit about that. So back when I was the age of probably many of you in this room, I had two voices in my head. One of those voices was my grandmother. She was very socially aware, very strict Democrat. And she said that it's really important that I do something that makes some positive impact on the world, right? That was her motto. And then I also had another significant voice, which is if you don't do something that makes money, then by the time you're 60, you're going to be eating cat food. And so both of those voices had a big impression on me. And so I tried to split my career into two. I started off, first of all, political science, then shifted towards psychology. And my focus was on people that were traumatized. So I worked with clergy abuse victims. I worked with, unfortunately, rape victims, war veterans. That was a big part of my early focus. But if that kind of work can really be hard on you mentally. And so I knew that when I turned 40, that's when I would make a shift. By then, I had a pretty strong background in psychology, as you can imagine. I earned my PhD. And I started to apply it to organizations in general. But I had ended up in New York City. My last gig here was working at the VA. And so it was easy enough to come into New York City. And the finance part really happened because those guys are everywhere. You know, in New York City, it's by far the most common thing that somebody does for a living. And just by being near, I started to pick that up. We became relatively popular because we have a strong relationship with the investment banking at Bank of America. And Bank of America brings us into everything to talk about stuff. That led to some serious hedge funds, a lot of private equity firms, and additional investment banks too, like Baird and UBS. So that's how I got here.
When you made that switch at the age of 40, did you know for a while beforehand that industrial organizational psychology was an option for you, or is this something that sort of popped up spur of the moment as an opportunity for you to switch career paths?
But when I was 20, I had no idea there was any such thing. And it wasn't until I was 30 that I had a buddy. And one of the things I used to love to do is I'd watch football on Monday nights, and all my buddies would get together. I had a guy that just was getting clobbered at work. His team didn't like him, and they weren't getting together, getting along. And so I was in my program at the time. And so he said, "Can you just come in and fix this for me?" He was paying me for that like 2 or 3 weeks worth of work more than I was making my entire year otherwise. And so I thought, oh, this might be that thing, but I hadn't fulfilled my commitment yet. So, like a good student, I learned everything I could about it. And so by the time I was ready to go, I was overeducated, but lack of experience.
Sure. let's zoom in a little bit on the work you do now. Tell us a little bit about the people you coach, what their role is, what their day-to-day responsibilities are, and maybe a little bit about their personality as well.
Yeah, so there's a few of them. So one of the primary sets are portfolio managers. And I don't think that you can really put a portfolio manager into one bucket because we know that people that are doing fundamentals or maybe merger and R, maybe they're into real estate, or they're doing those types of funds. A lot of them are very, very different than what we would call quants. Um, Quants, I mean, I have to look at them through a completely different lens. So that's one set. We also look at people that are managing portfolios in private equity firms. And so in those settings, we're really looking at somebody that can manage that team, but also analyze opportunities and source opportunities. In the PE world, we will also take that same tool and look at a portfolio company to see if that team can manage that additional revenue and if they can keep pace. Private equity, the minute somebody writes that check, you're on the clock. And if that company, if they don't get it that you have to work at pace at that point, they're going to fail. So that's another thing. And then with investment banking, it's a lot of people that have been around, maybe 5 or 6 years. They're showing a ton of potential, and they're ready to put them into a track that is going to lead them into a director position. But we're rarely assessing people that are, coming off the street to work with them. They're people that are already there, and we want to see if they can manage that next step.
What would you say are kind of the main personality archetypes then? Because you described a lot of a diverse range of characters depending on what position they may hold. So what are kind of like the main qualities that you see pop up across the people you work with, and then also specifically for quants?
Yeah, so let's start off with one that has a shadow side. One of the things that I see almost universally in portfolio managers is that they internalize failures. And so let me put a little context to this. So when things happen to us, we have a predisposition as to how we explain how that went. So either I think that something good or bad happened because I was lucky, right? Or maybe God is helping me or something like that. But I attribute those successes to something that's outside of myself. In some cases, that attribution is very specific. I attribute my success to people that I know, right? So my boss, my parents, I had a teacher, I had a mentor, or something like that. Other people really helped me get there. Then on the other side, internally, I may attribute my success to the things I did, right? I took the right action, I did the right thing, I made the right call, and so on and so forth. And that's why I tend to be successful. But the last one is the one that's the most common in PMs, and that is that they're successful because of who they are, right? And so their success is because who they are, meaning they're smart, maybe they're charming, maybe they're clever, maybe they have good lateral thinking, which we should talk about in a little bit. But maybe they have those traits, and their success now starts to intertwine with their identity. So this becomes a really good thing early, because what will happen is that if you have a drawdown for 3 or 4 days in a row, because now it's starting to get into your ego, into your identity, those guys will put in countless hours. Like, so, there's guys that'll stay up all night long just to try to solve for what's going on. And that effort and that commitment is often why they right the ship and they're successful. And I mentioned as we started talking that there's also a shadow side to this. The shadow side is that if you're constantly tying your identity into your work, the amount of stress that you experience gets higher and higher and higher. And so it's not uncommon to talk to guys starting in their maybe mid to late 40s and especially into their 50s, that they have heart issues, right? They have relationship issues. All of these things are happening. It's not because they're bad people or they're definitely healthy people. I haven't seen many that appear to be unhealthy, but it's because the stress has eroded, for so long, that eventually they start to get sick. So that's the dark side of it. And for me, it's kind of hard because I want that trait because I know that person's more likely to be successful. But then I also encourage our clients to make sure they're paying attention and that at some point down the line, that person's going to need a coach. So that's one. And obviously, it's a long answer. Um, should we talk a little bit about some of the cognitive abilities that they have? With that's maybe not a little less of a downer.
Sure. Yeah, I think
So
that'd be useful.
yeah, so there's something that we've identified that's really, really important. And this is true whether you're a quant or you're fundamentals or whatever it is. And that is that you have to be able to think laterally. And it's easier for me to give an example than to try to explain what that is. I interviewed a guy for a PM position that was let go from another really large firm because he completely blew it on a merger and arb trade. And the way that he approached it is that every single day he would go down to the trial because the government had sued to block the merger. If the merger went through, then he wants to be long on it. If the doesn't look like it's going to go through, he wants to be short on it. So gets up the first day and he sees the government and they're presenting their case. And he also had a legal background, which is why he was in the position. So he thought, oh, wow, the government doesn't really seem to know what they're doing, right? So he goes back and increases his long on the book. And then he goes the next day, and every single day, or at least regularly, he sees that the government is doing a terrible job of presenting their case, and he bets bigger and bigger and bigger that the merger is going to go through. So at this point, he's now over leveraged. I'm not sure where their risk guy was, but he's gone way beyond what I think most risk people would have accepted. But he's that sure that the case is so clear that's going to go through. And then finally, the ruling comes down, and the judge rules in favor of the government. The merger's blocked, right? They lost no less than $100 million in that moment, right? Just like that, it's gone. And he was out the next week. The reason why that happened is because he became so narrowly focused on how the trial went. And he was doing that because he's a lawyer and that's what he understood, that he didn't pay attention to other signals. Like this woman, who's the judge in that case, had never ruled against the Biden administration. Biden had actually appointed her. And there was a whole nother set of things that were happening in Pennsylvania that were related to that. There was a very similar case that had also gone in the government's favor. So that and there's other things too, but he did not see left or right and only looked down the middle. As a result, he completely missed this call and lost his role. The guys that are good at this, they have what I would call leaky attention. And leaky attention means that you get distracted by things that are on the periphery and you notice those types of things. And when you're really good at it, you see a way that these things start to connect. And by doing that, you can make some really interesting models that other people are missing. Let me give you one example. I think it's a strange one. There is a John Mayer song, and I think John Mayer is kind of old now. I'd be surprised if anybody listens to him much. but he's got a specific song that's about waiting for good things to happen. And you can correlate the number of Spotify downloads for this John Mayer song with consumer confidence, right? It's not a perfect correlation, matter of fact, far from it, but enough so that it could be put in a regression model. And so that's the kind of leaky attention that the guys that are really good at are able to do.
That's interesting. Um, did you end up hiring that guy, the one who had the
Oh,
previous experience?
no, no. And he was a great guy, right? And smart and all that kind of stuff. But the fund that he was going to join, they absolutely had to find an advantage over Citadel, and he was not going to be able to provide that.
Yeah. I want to go back to failure for a moment, and ask a couple of things. When it comes to traders who internalize failure, I'm curious what comes first in kind of like a chicken or the egg scenario. Where is it the person who happens to internalize failure that becomes most successful in trading, or is it um, like trading causes this person to internalize failure after being in the career for a while?
So I think the attribute itself, right? So we'll step away from whether you're a good trader or professional or whatever, but the attribute itself does drive activity, right? It's so uncomfortable to lose that you go way overboard to make sure that you don't lose, right? And in a way, it's it's almost like a small death, right? It goes right at your ego. So there's then a subset of people that then go into finance, right? And they're all analysts and they got their summer job at Goldman and they're in that training program or they're doing the thing with BOA or whatever, right? And there's a lot of them, and only a small section of them have this disposition to internalize failure so much. And it's easier for them to say, well, I screwed it up and my boss didn't get too upset, so I guess it's not such a big deal. And then I'm going to go hang out at PJ Clark's, right? And so that's one set. But within that, but those that are internalizing the failure, even though it doesn't matter to their boss or they're not getting scored on it or whatever, it bugs them so much that they'll take the weekend and do that, right? And fix it instead of hanging out with their buddies. So those are the guys that are promoted, and then eventually the rest peel off into other activities or they drop out of finance or whatever. But I think I would say that it predicts success in almost anything that you go into, and at the same time, it also predicts a decline when you hit your early 40s, and most people can't keep it up.
Is there a way to manage that lifestyle where you are able to both succeed at your job and have fun, or is it really kind of a sacrifice where you have to choose one over the other?
Yep, there's a shift. So I think that you can have fun, but you have to have a certain level of discipline to be able to make all of that work together. So one of the things that we talked about just a minute ago was this leaky attention. And leaky attention is oftentimes a way to explain people with ADHD. And so you would say, well, how could somebody with attention deficits ever be able to do something like this, which requires almost constant attention throughout the entire day? And so what these guys do is they have somehow implemented this incredible amount of discipline. For example, there's a guy that I interviewed. He had fantastic lateral thinking or leaky attention, but was also highly disciplined. As a matter of fact, every single morning before work, he would run 7 miles, and he would run exactly 7 miles. And so as we were talking, I said, well, have you ever thought about running a marathon? Because that's one of my hobbies is that. And he goes, yeah, I did decide to start training for a marathon. I go, okay, well, which one are you going to do? And I think he was going to do the Brooklyn one. And as we're talking, I said, well, how's this going to change your morning routine? Are you going to have to get up a little bit earlier so you can add more miles? He goes, well, no, I'll train at night. I said, I didn't quite understand what he was talking about until I dawned on me that he did not connect the 7 miles he was running every morning to his training. He was actually going to do the training for the marathon at night and do his extra miles then. So that meant that there are days when he would run 7 miles in the morning and then have to run 15 or 16 miles at night, right? But that's how disciplined he was, like this rigid discipline. But because he was like that, he was also able to compartmentalize when to go do something fun. And this guy absolutely loved his kids. And so that that rigid discipline allowed him to take his kids skiing almost every weekend because he was able to create that time for that. So I don't want to give the impression that these guys don't ever have a good time. They do, but they schedule it.
I'm curious about whether this level of discipline is something that people are born with or something that people can work on. How do you think people can improve on it?
Yeah. So I have a bias that most things can be changed or developed, but we know that willpower is almost like a muscle. And if you exercise your willpower muscle, you are definitely able to build it out. Um, one one way that a lot of us are doing that is we'll do a thing called a Pomodoro. And if you haven't learned this study technique, it's a pretty effective one. And all it means is that you focus on your studies for a set period of time, and you set a timer. When that timer goes off, you wrap up that thought, and then you take your mind somewhere completely else, right? And maybe that's for another 10 minutes. Maybe maybe you're checking your internet or your Instagram or your fantasy football team, but whatever it is, you're doing something different. And then when that time is up, you drop it, you take another 20 minutes. And what a lot of people will do is they'll start with 20 minutes. The next week, it's 25 minutes. Next week, it's 30. Next week, it's 35. And just like a weightlifter, they are expanding how long they can focus at any given time. So that's just one of a lot of ways that you can develop discipline, even if you have this leaky attention issue.
So back to your work in the industry, you're tasked with doing two things, right? Helping traders improve who might be struggling, but also weeding out people who might not necessarily be the best fit for the company. Which case among underperforming traders do you find more often? And can the traders themselves do anything to get into to get out of the lost cause camp?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So let's talk about the weeding them out first, because that is a piece that's probably how our company makes the most money, um, is that weeding out thing. And on the Wall Street Journal article in the comments, some guy called me a snitch, which I thought was hilarious, right? Like I'm the guy that is going to snitch on somebody if they're not going to be able to cover the job. So on that part, that can be pretty cut and dry, and it's usually this guy's not going to make it, or he'll make it, but you have to put in a couple of guide rails, or you should give him a mentor or something like that, or they're just not going to cut it. There are people that are legitimately a lost cause, and they're not going to be able to do the job, and that's really can be heartbreaking. When you come across something like that, they're just not going to do it. And in those cases, they like if they were in some kind of an intensive process or program and they had a coach or whatever, they may become a C plus B player, but the amount of effort that it takes to get that person up there, it just would be easier for those funds to hire somebody that's already a B plus player and invest on them becoming an A player. So it sounds like we're treating people as units, but it is one of the harsh realities of that is that they will not put a lot of effort into reclaiming somebody. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is with somebody that's a star, like they've been hitting it out of the park, but all of a sudden there's a glitch, right? And we can fix the glitch, and then they're back to being a star again. Um, the the typical issue with the glitch is usually when something else has gone wrong in their life, and that put them over on the ability to manage stress. So, imagine that you're going through the standard, drawdowns and ups and so on and so forth, and you've learned, it bothers you when you have the drawdown, but you have a process for managing it. But then at home, your wife says, I've had enough. I can't stand this life anymore. And I'm taking the kids and, we're leaving. That now kicked your bucket of stress a level higher, so that now when that drawdown hits, you don't have that reserve to be able to manage it because there's other things that are going on. And so you need a new level of capacity to be able to take care of that. And that's generally what I'm helping with.
What would you say are things that we as young people can do now to maybe like fortify our minds and prepare for high stress situations, maybe in finance, maybe outside of finance, just for all stressful life situations?
Yeah, well, if you're lucky, you're a sociopath, and so you don't have to worry about it then. There are, uh, I don't want to derail your question. We should talk briefly about sociopaths, but that's covered
Sure.
after this. Assuming you're not a sociopath, um, I do believe that you can build that stress muscle in the same way you build your willpower muscle, right? And that is intentionally putting yourself in situations that are just on the edge of what you know how to do, right? So you're putting yourself in those spots that are just naturally going to cause you to be stressful. So that's one thing that you can do. Um, but then when you're in that situation, I think that there is one mental shift that you can make that will make a massive difference. And it's very, very hard to do when you're 20. So now's a good time to start working on it. And that is to shift your time horizon. Meaning, when somebody is 25 or younger, generally their time horizons are shorter, right? So they're holding in their mind 2 days, a week, maybe a semester, so on and so forth, but they're not holding in their minds, 4 years, 6 years, 10 years at a time. And as people get older and they have a little bit of perspective because there's now so much time behind you, it's easier to wrap your head around what 5 or 10 years looks like. When you do that, the little crisis that's happening right now becomes smaller because you're then looking at that crisis that's right now in the context of 10 years. And in 5 years, will what's happening right now really matter? In 10 years, will it even be a memory? But right now, it feels like a big crisis. So if you can start that self-talk by putting things in perspective, in a year, will this bother me? In 3 years, will this matter? In 5 years, will I remember this? Just by doing that and increasing your time horizon, I think will really help you with that, because that is why quants in particular do this well, is they understand statistics. And statistics are rarely measuring a one-off situation. Statistics usually require a series of events to take place, and then the probability of whether that's good or bad evens out. And so most of the people in the room should already be wired for that. They just need to remind themselves that that's the case.
Tell us a little bit about the sociopath situation.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm fascinated by sociopaths just like everybody else. And when I was in my saving the world phase, I was asked to develop a trauma program for the Department of Corrections in Missouri. Um, and so the type of person that goes to jail in Missouri is probably different than in some other places. It can be a little rougher, even, I would say. Um, but that was my first experience with a true sociopath. And a lot of times we know people that are aggressive, we know people that are jerks, right? But that's different than a person that would be diagnosed as a sociopath or an antisocial personality disorder. That's the official term. Those people have this level of arousal that is lower than the rest of ours. So when they're having a typical normal day, they feel dull. They feel that sense of boredom. It's almost painful how bad that is. And that is a way that they were born. It's not something that they chose. It's not because their parents were bad. They were born that way. So when they're younger and their minds are less mature, they had to do things in order to make themselves less bored, be less painful. And sometimes those younger kids would do things like torture animals or take big risks or whatever. They would do things that would spike their stress. And when they spiked their stress, they felt normal. Where if you and I spiked our stress, we feel stressed, but they're feeling good at that point. So, because the stress is not a factor, and because they need a lot of excitement in order to feel normal, they naturally gravitate towards becoming a trader in PMs because they're every day can be a thrill, and they don't have the same hangups that other pods are having because they're becoming overly stressed. Um, and that will work pretty well for a while. The problem is that the stress for them is like an addiction, right? They're really self-medicating with the stress, and that means they will need, the amount of stress you need to feel normal at 25 is less than the amount of stress you need to feel normal at 35. And by the time you get into the 40s, you need a lot of exciting things going on. And oftentimes they manufacture that. So they'll take a bigger risk, or they'll take a chance that somebody else wouldn't expect, or something like that, in order to keep things going. And the last thing, though, I want to say to that is because it sounds like we have a linear trajectory here that eventually, they're gonna burn down or they're gonna be in jail. There appears to be some research now that suggests that there's a point where it levels off and they don't have the same need to make themselves stress out. And so if they can make it to that point where things start to moderate a little bit, then they're usually going to be okay. But for the hedge fund, it's a big risk to have something like that on your team, because they will take increasingly bigger bets on things. And if compliance isn't paying attention, or if the risk manager is not paying attention, it could go bad.
Yeah. I want to move back into your day to day. We'll talk maybe for another 5, 10 minutes or so, and then open it up for questions for everybody. But something I want to ask is, how do the conversations with traders happen, and what do you specifically help them improve upon in those coaching sessions?
So if we're going to go to if we're going to look at the coaching sessions in particular, they it's it's rare that a trader reaches out directly, right? Because there is some ego into all of this. However, they oftentimes either had some version of a meltdown, did something really, made a bet that was really dumb, or something like that, and their boss, the managing director, or somebody like that, noticed it. Then what they would do is, because they don't really know how to manage it either, they reached out to either the COO or if they're big enough, they may have a decent HR department, and ask them to find help. And it's either the COO or the CHRO that reaches out to us. And the way that we engage with them is that we start by putting them through a very deep assessment. The reason why that is done is that it accelerates the process, because a lot of times a trader has never really fully been known or understood by somebody else. And that experience of it is a little bit scary, but it also bonds them to the coach pretty quickly. On our end, we can get a better idea of exactly how the stress is manifesting and why it's being created that way. Because to say that people get stressed over a drawdown is a way oversimplification. They all are wired differently, and what stresses one out may not stress another out, and so on and so forth. Once they are engaged in that relationship, they've gone through the assessment. Um, their first is kind of an opportunity to talk. And I find that I don't talk very much at all that first session. So even in the assessment, they're talking for about 2.5 hours. But now that we're actually engaging, they will dominate that time. And they do that because there's just a lot to get out, right? They haven't been talking to anybody for could be a decade about any of this kind of stuff. And so now the door's open, this is that chance. Um, once that's out there, um, because these guys are super practical people, they're usually looking for a suggestion. And we'll just offer something to try, right? So next time this happens, try this. And that suggestion is going to be very strongly informed by the assessment and what we've already experienced. When they try it, they come back and we run what's called a power conversation. And all that is what did you do that worked? What got in the way of being fully successful? What did you learn while trying? And how can we do it better next time? And what obstacles do we have to remove? Right. So again, it's a very, very practical conversation. We'll then adjust and they'll try it again. Now, sometimes we're just talking about the tool and what they're trying to do. Other times we haven't gotten all the rest of the stuff out yet. And part of the session would be that, but that just differs person to person. Most people engage with us for about 6 months. And then either we keep working because they need a lot more help than we thought, or they engage with us more for tune-ups. The last thing that I'll say about it is that we also we strongly encourage people that are working with us to call in the moment. So it's hard to predict when somebody's going to have that aha moment or really get it. So if they can reach out and we can talk for 10 minutes right before or right after something happens, that's much more effective than holding it for that next session, which could be 2 weeks away. So am I answering your question, or are you looking for more about how that goes?
I think that was very helpful. And then maybe to close us out on the same topic, what's something that maybe actions we can take to best prime ourselves to be ready for a career in quantitative finance or finance in general or life in general? And then also maybe the top thing that everyone who wants to go into trading should know ahead of time.
All right, so I'm going to paint a little bit of a bleak picture, but my goal here is not to steal your dream. There are people that are doing this work, and it is immensely satisfying for them. All right, but what they're doing, so a quant in general is playing. It's like a sport, right? And what they're doing is they're constantly keeping score. And the guys that I have interviewed, it's very rare that they're into this for a lot of material gain. They have nice cars, but they're not all driving Ferraris and Lamborghinis, right? They have nice houses, but they're not living in mansions, right? They're not in it to spend all that money that they're making. More often than not, they leave that money to another generation, and it becomes more like generational wealth, and it's not something that they really enjoyed, with that. But they're still keeping score. The problem with keeping score is that you're keeping score every day, but the game is never over, right? So it's not like a basketball game or a football game or whatever, where it's done in 60 minutes or 90 minutes. It never ends. So you're a lot like Sisyphus. Sisyphus is a myth about this guy that was cursed to push this boulder up the hill every day. And then at the end of the day, it rolled back down, and then he had to push it up, right? And most people think that's the most depressing story of all time. But there is a subset of people that can find joy in that. And you have to be able to find joy in playing a game where you're constantly keeping score, but nobody ever wins and the game never ends. If you can't find some level of joy in that, it's probably not for you. But if you can, this is a great, great way to live your life.
Awesome. Well, I think it's about time to turn it over for questions to the audience. So before we do so, let's give a round of applause one more time to Dr. Day. Sure.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, so when you're talking about like expanding your time horizon and how it kind of makes like day-to-day things seem more relevant in the long term, do you think that also clarifies like what is most important in the long term? Like applying to colleges, for example, is something that takes place over a 3 month period, but it's often obviously very impactful.
Yeah, so the source of this research is a guy that came out of Canada. His name is Elliot Jacques. He passed away, I think it's got to be 15 years ago now. But what he generally would say is that once you can hold this time horizon in your head, that you start to look at some of the crises that you've had in your life. And maybe when you were 13 years old, there's a girl that broke your heart, and that seemed like the worst possible thing. But then you realize, a couple of years ago that you can't even remember her name. That starts to stick in your head as you look backwards. And then when you start to look forwards, even an opportunity like going to Carnegie Mellon, what a fantastic school, right? What a great place to be for 4 years, and maybe for some of you 5 years. But it's such an amazing opportunity. But had you gone somewhere else, your life maybe still would have been okay, right? It wasn't a crux that you can't recover from, right? Your life still goes. So once you start to look at that even the things that seem incredibly traumatic and tragic, those things across the scope of your life just don't, they're not going to cause you, it's not going to be mortal. It's not going to be a mortal wound.
Thank you.
I hope I'm answering your question. It's so philosophical, and I could get into that part, but usually that's when people start to get sleepy. It's when we start to talk philosophy. So,
any other questions? Sure, in the back.
So I think it's something that we all suffer from, but how does someone separate his self-worth from his success, whether it be professionally, academically, etc.?
yeah. So, Jacob, I'm having a little bit of a hard time because of the distance. Can you
Yeah, the question was, how can somebody separate themselves from their success, right?
That is such a great question. And so first of all, I am writing a book about this. It's really about this exact thing. And without making it sound too weird, generally, most of us are operating from a lot of different self states. And it sounds like we're talking about multiple personalities here. We really aren't. Most of you intuitively know what I'm talking about because you know how you are when you're with your parents. You know how you are when you're with your friends on a Friday night. You know how you might be at a religious service or something like that. You're operating from these different self states, and they're significantly different. The problem is that when we look at our success as a trader and it bleeds into every single other area, right? That I can only be a good dad or a good mom if I'm also a good trader. And I can be a good friend if I'm also a good trader. I could be, all of these other things. If that all gets mixed in together and you're not able to understand that there's more than just one of you, then I think you're going to get stuck. So think about, what does success mean for you to be a good friend? What does success mean for you to be a good, parent or husband someday or whatever? Start to look at the other areas and other aspects of your life and identify a different metric for that goes beyond just the ability to bring home a lot of money.
I've got a question. Nobody else has one. What, Dr. Dave, do you think surprised you most when you started working with traders? And then what continues to surprise you today?
Yeah. So the first thing is that they're not any different than really anybody else. And this is a major insight that affected my life in general, is that the first time I met, a Fortune 500 CEO that was, some Princeton or Harvard grad, I thought, this guy is going to be so impressive. And then he ends up being goofy, right? Or kind of silly, right? And then traders, you might think, oh, these guys have these great big brains, especially the quants, they can hold all the statistical stuff in their head, but they're not really any different. They like to drink beer, and they like the Green Bay Packers, which is my favorite football team. And they have all these things that are very similar. There's only these little aspects that make them good at their job. But had they had another little tweak over here, they might have been an artist, right? So once you realize that everybody that you meet, the difference between you and them is not this. The difference between you and them is this. And that will make a big difference into how you interact with them. It'll change your confidence level when you speak to them. You'll take more chances with them, which generally is a good thing. So that's how I would approach it.
Got a question over here.
Do you play guitar? And if so, what kind of music do you like?
All right, so I'm learning to play guitar. I think I'm at the point where I can say yes, I play. When you get to be of a certain age, learning a new instrument is really good for mental things. I think the type of music that I like may be a little peculiar. There's a band that I really like called the Violent Femmes. I'm not sure if you've heard of them or not, but I'm really interested in punk rock music. And Violent Femmes were the punk rock band from Wisconsin, which is where I grew up. I do like other things like that I would call maybe more alternative music. I think music's starting to become good again. So I'm really enjoying some of the stuff that's starting to come out now. There was a time, I think the millennials, their music is really bad. But my generation, which is Generation X, our music was pretty good. I think this next generation is not bad either.
Awesome.
So,
Anything else? Yeah. Well, Zishan.
Hi again. First of all, unrelated to my actual question, but are you a fan of Green Day or 182, or those electric music?
I heard that. Am I a fan of Green Bay?
Green Day, and Blink 182.
Oh, so we are. I do like Green Day. I like Green Day because they take a position, right? They did a Broadway play called American Idiot, and I thought that took a lot of guts because they probably alienated a good 40% of the people that usually like them for that. So I appreciate people that take a chance. The band out of that time is more like around Radiohead. I'm learning to play Creep now, and that's really interesting. I personally don't relate to the song. I don't see myself as a creep, but there's something about that song. But yeah, that stuff's not bad at all.
That's good to hear. My main question was when you're talking about leaky attention, kind of lateral thinking, how do you distinguish that from just people that get distracted? If they're studying, they go on their phones instead, or things like that.
Yeah. So the people that get distracted lack a stream of consciousness to it. There's a lack of connection between one idea and the next. They're all disparate. For people that are really good at lateral connection, they're actually building connections as they move out from the original idea. And the way that we test for that is we have this thing that's called an alternate use test. And we ask people to give us alternative uses for an object. And they'll just spit out a lot, as many different alternative uses as they can think of for 2 minutes. Now, it's not your standard question because I have a bank of all the answers that I've heard, all the categories that those answers fall into, so on and so forth. And I find the people that do that well do two things. One is that they're able to operate from different categories. And then once they get in a category, things build, right? So one of the things we'll ask about is like a bicycle pump. And maybe they'll say, oh, it can be used as a jump rope. And then they build on that, oh, you can jump over the top of the thing, or you can use it as a vault. And then, oh, it's a vault. I could use this for gymnastics, right? Their ideas build, but they don't build in a linear way. They build in a way that's more like a web, right? It goes that way. And I realize this is a little esoteric, but it's just a level of creativity that comes from that.
Would you liken it to like The Little Prince, if you've ever read that book?
I gotta say, catch that last part again.
Yeah, like, have you ever read the book The Little Prince? Like, would you liken it to that?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it, but that makes sense. I read that in French when I was in high school, and I haven't read it since. So it's tough. I wish I had a better answer, but I'm not sure.
We'll do a last couple questions over here.
Of creativity and expanding ideas, is there anything actionable that we can do to improve that, or is that more fixed person?
Yeah, so I would take your the next problem that you have to solve and apply a mind map to it. Even if it doesn't seem appropriate, just try to see how that works. And if you're not familiar with mind map, it's easy enough to Google, and there's a ton of free mind map software out there. But I would give that a try. I do want to say something that might be a little bit controversial, is that I have interviewed about 150 PMs. I have not interviewed a woman yet, right? And that's a problem, because I believe that at least genetically, women have a capability around lateral thinking that is more natural than it is for some guys, right? So the other thing that is important is that some of the most successful investors we worked with in PE are women. So there needs to be some kind of a shift, because I do believe that women have a capability. At least some things are easy for them when it comes to trading, but there's something keeping them from getting to the point where they interview with me. And I wish I knew the answer to that, but I'm so glad to see that there's at least one woman in the audience here.
And then last question up here.
Yeah, talk about sociopaths. What specifically about them makes them so good?
All right, Jacob, give me that last part.
Yeah, what specifically about sociopaths makes them so good at the job?
Because the stress doesn't get to them. They're not bothered by stress at all. Let me give you one example. So I was interviewing a guy that turns out to be a sociopath. And one of the questions we ask is, what's the difference between the days that you have a drawdown versus the days that you win, right? And the first thing that comes out of his mouth is, oh, there's absolutely no difference, right? As soon as I walk out the door, I'm ready to go do the next thing. And then his mind goes, wait, I'm supposed to care about this. And then he ends up going into this long story about how it completely destroys him. And it's so exaggerated that it's clearly made up, right? So the reason why they're good at it is that they don't get stressed out by it. Now, there's also a second thing, and this is next level, but for a sociopath to get to the point where they're in a fund and they're not in jail, because a lot of sociopaths, they end up in jail, is that they've developed a level of conscientiousness where they have these guardrails. And as a result, they know how far they can take things without getting in trouble. So when they go into a fund, they are much more aware of what compliance wants. They use compliance at a much higher level because their own brain doesn't do that well. And they'll follow the guardrails created by the risk manager in a way that's actually better than other people, but they'll go right up to the edge. So the two reasons why sociopaths are good at this is they don't get freaked out by stress, and they understand how to stay within the guardrails.
Awesome. Oh, go for it. Follow up.
Yeah, I mean, like, just follow up after that. How can you determine whether somebody is sociopath or not, and what do you do about them to like add those guardrails?
That's a really long answer, because sociopaths are really good at not looking like sociopaths until it's too late. There used to be a show called 2.5 Men. And back when Charlie was in that one, he is a good example of a sociopath, because if you follow his arc through the story, he's always charming and likable, and he's able to meet women. That's part of the shtick of the show. And then something happens where he becomes awkward, right? And that is very common among sociopaths. They have a set of rules. Like Matt LaFleur, the Packers coach, has the first 10 plays scripted out. He knows what to do. A sociopath knows what to do for the first 10 steps, but as soon as it starts to become off, all of a sudden they don't know how to interact anymore. But the thing that makes them really interesting is the stare. A sociopath will stare at you and not blink like other people, because they're really studying you, right? If you and I were in the same room, I would naturally have a sense of what you were feeling, right? Are you anxious? Are you sad? Are you happy? I would feel it inside as well, but the sociopath can't do that. So they stare at your face to look to see if your mouth's moving up, to see if your eyes are crinkling, and then they're making a little computation. Oh, his mouth is turned up. He must be happy. His brow is furrowed. He must be frustrated. But to get that information, they have to stare at you. And so that's usually the first giveaway that somebody might be a sociopath.
Okay, thank you.
Listen, Dr. Dave, this has been an absolute treat for all of us. Thank you for your time on a Friday afternoon. We'll be sending out this recording to everybody and to you as well. But one last time, let's give him a round of applause. Anything else you'd like to add to close, Dr. Dave?
Other than, for me, this is an absolute blast, right? To spend my Friday afternoon with you guys. I do miss being a professor. I did that for a while, a long time ago. And my encouragement is that if you want to go into finance, let somebody else tell you no, just keep trying. But if you do get to that point where you think, oh, it's just not worth it, I don't like playing a game where I can't win, or I don't like keeping score all the time and never ending, then it's okay to do something else. The things that you're going to learn in the process of going through finance, you can apply in 100 different other ways. And then for you, Jacob, you called me or reached out to me out of the blue, which I thought that was pretty gutsy. But guys like me love doing this. And so don't be afraid to reach out to the next guy that's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal with his hair blowing on his terrace, and ask him, because you'd be surprised how many people will take the time out to do it. It's really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again. It was definitely a blast for us as well.
You bet. If you have any questions, I think it's pretty easy to reach me if you look through my webpage, or I don't mind Jacob sending that out. I'm happy to respond or have somebody respond.
Sure. Yeah. And what about that leadership assessment?
That's right. Yeah, let's send that out. So one of the things that we have is a tool that shows how you prefer to lead. There are some that are more prevalent in finance, but this is pretty agnostic. It goes in anyone. it's in our tool, so it's like a very small version of what everybody else has to go through, but it'll give you a general sense of how you prefer to be led, and that should help you maybe at least a little bit in choosing which fund you want to go to or which path you want to take when it comes to finance. So if I give you that link, Jacob, you can send it out with the video.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Excellent.
All right. Let's
Take care.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. Bye.